Because the Chief of the Army Staff, General Manoj Pande, has made it very clear that this scheme, according to the Army, is transformational. He says detailed deliberations were held before the scheme came out. I spoke to him, and that conversation we shall play out on India First. But who's fueling this fire? What's the role of these coaching centers? What about the opposition? We'll talk about this in greater detail. I'm Gaurav Sawant. As always, let's get started with the headlines on India First. Army Chief debunks myths around Agnipath. After the Army puts out the recruitment notification, General Manoj Pande insists there will be no rollback. We bring you this India Today exclusive. But no end to anger over Agnipath. Netas hijacked the protest. Congress stages a rail roko in the national capital. Massive traffic jams choke the national capital and the NCR. Prime Minister Narendra Modi's mega Agnipath defense. The Prime Minister allays fears over the recruitment scheme, says reforms will benefit the nation over time. Big breakthrough in the Sidhu Moosewala murder investigations. Bolero module of 6 gangsters busted. The singer was targeted with an AK series assault rifle. India Today leads the Moosewala killing probe. News break. Congress party continues its Rahul Bachao Andolan. Presents a memorandum to the President over Congress MPs grilling by the Enforcement Directorate. Rahul Gandhi, of course, is to be questioned for the 5th day tomorrow. The Army Chief has made it very clear, Agnipath scheme is transformational. There were detailed deliberations held within the armed forces with all stakeholders, and that there will be no rollback. I spoke to General Manoj Pande. Let's listen in to this India Today exclusive.
So firstly, I must unequivocally state that there will be no dilution to the current system of regimentation that we have in the Indian Army, which is time tested and which has stood the test of time. I think this impression is getting carried when we talk of all India, all class. Now, it is true insofar as the intention is to broad base or widen our recruitment base, and that is primarily to provide equal opportunity for youth from all parts of the country to join the defense forces or join the Indian Army in particular. A soldier fights for the unit, and like you highlighted, for the Naam Namak Nishan of his unit or the regiment. So I don't think there will be any change. Of course, there is this aspect of assimilating and integrating the Agniveers in a short period of 4 years. Well, that will be a challenge. We have evolved and we are looking at methods of doing it. But at the end of it, I believe that our system is so strong that the Agniveers will be able to imbibe the values that is some of it which you just mentioned, and come out at the end of 4 years in the same manner. It appears that when you say 75% will be released into the society, 25% will be retained, it is not as if in a unit you will have 75% soldiers who are less than 5 years service and only 25 who are above 5 years. It will not happen like this. We'll make sure, and the model works out in a manner that at no stage will you have more than 50% Agniveers or 50% who are less than 5 years or 4 years in a unit. So we will be able to strike a good balance between youth and experience. we will bring about positive changes if required to make the system, relevant to the times. So there is, I would say, to that extent, yes, we will be open to make these small changes or modifications if required. So my message to them would be, this is a unique opportunity for the youth to work for their bright future. It is a unique opportunity for them to serve the nation, join the military, join the Indian Army, imbibe the values that the Army stands for. And once you move out, or once you are re-enrolled in the Army, you will, or we expect them, or we would want them to act as a bridge between the military and the society. So all that the military stands for, the same values, same qualities, are then, also, I would say, transferred or imbibed or spread in the society at large. So I explained to you what are the features for the, for the soldier or for a youth, for the nation, as well as for the Indian Army. Now, as to why all this is happening, in my opinion, it is primarily because of lack of complete knowledge or awareness about the features of the Agnipath scheme. And as you have realized over the last 5-6 days, as people are understanding, or the youth are understanding the scheme in a better manner, I think the response or whatever anger, if you like, that is something which is slowly getting diluted. यदि आप इसके जो ऑब्जेक्टिव्स और डिलीवरेबल्स में जाएंगे तो आपको ज्ञात होगा कि ये सभी के लिए और ये सभी के हित में है। जहां तक सेना का सवाल है, मैं 3-4 मुद्दे आपके सामने रखना चाहूँगा। हमारी सेना का यूथफुल प्रोफाइल इस योजना के कार्यान्वयन होने के बाद इट विल इम्प्रूव ड्रास्टिकली। दूसरा, हमारे जवान जो हम रिक्रूट करते हैं या इंडक्ट करते हैं सेना में, दे विल बी मोर टेक्नोलॉजिकली एडेप्ट and be able to, operate our weapon systems in a much better fashion and the equipment in the future. तीसरा, हमारा यूथफुल एंड एक्सपीरियंस का जो एक बैलेंस होगा यूनिट में या सेना में, हम उसमें भी बढ़ोतरी करना चाहेंगे। और चौथा, इनके अग्निवीरों का इंटीग्रेशन जो हमारे यूनिट्स या सेना में रहेगा, उससे भी पूरे तौर से हमको इसका फायदा पड़ेगा। बट ये सच नहीं है। जो आप स्कीम को यदि सही तरीके से समझेंगे तो जैसे मैंने बताया है, 4 साल में एक युवा जब फौज में 4 साल काटने के बाद, ट्रेनिंग के बाद जब बाहर समाज में या सोसाइटी में जाएगा तो उसको इस तरीके से वो इक्विप होगा, ही विल कैरी अ यूनिक रेज्यूमे, उसके पास ये क्वालिफिकेशंस होंगी बिना, और डिसिप्लिन और जो फौज के वैल्यूज़ और क्वालिटीज़ को छोड़कर मुझे लगता है एक पर्याप्त मात्रा में वो अपने आप को समाज में एक जगह बना पाएगा। जहाँ तक सेना का सवाल है, ये हमारे लिए एक बड़ा अहम मुद्दा रहेगा कि 4 साल के बाद जो 75% युवा समाज में जाएंगे, उनको किस तरह से हम वैल्यू एडिशन कर पाए। और इसके संदर्भ में आपको सबको जानकारी दी गई है कि किस तरह से इनको अपने नेशनल एजुकेशन पॉलिसी के तहत अलग अलग क्रेडिट्स दिए जाएंगे, ताकि जब वो सेना से 4 साल बाद बाहर निकलेंगे, दे आर सूटेबली kitted, suitably equipped.
So the Army Chief sees this as transformational, a game changer, a win-win, and thinks that the opposition is perhaps because of lack of information. Or is there actually something more sinister? We'll talk about this in greater detail. Joining me on the broadcast is Rakesh Sinha, BJP Member of Parliament in the Rajya Sabha. Swati Malik represents the Congress party on the broadcast. Also with me is Lieutenant General Sanjay Kulkarni, former Director General of Infantry. The General understands this aspect very well. And I want to begin by asking Swati Malik. The Army Chief calls this transformational. Madam, is the opposition because of lack of knowledge, or is this about politics, or do you think that the scheme is actually flawed?
Gaurav, it's rather strange that the BJP, as always, has not discussed even the scheme in the parliament. Why could they not wait for another 3 weeks? And if you look at their track record, why the Congress is calling it a half-baked scheme, because this has not been consulted properly, discussed properly. You look at their track record. CAA was brought in 2.5 years ago. The rules have still not been enacted, right? You look at the farmer law, that was withdrawn. The 3 farming black laws were withdrawn. You look at GST. Now in GST also, within 60 days, there were 376 changes that were made.
For the moment, can we concentrate on this scheme? Because that's my show today. The Army Chief says,
this is important.
You know, we will come to that aspect perhaps in a moment. What's wrong with this scheme according to the Congress party? Because the Army Chief is defending it. Additional Secretary in the Department of Military Affairs, he's defending it. What is the problem with it? Is it lack of information, or is there something else, ma'am?
No, it is absolutely lack of transparency, for that matter. Even the representation given to the President of India today says that this is the first time that the Army Chiefs have to explain a scheme of the government. That is the politicization of the army also that is happening, right? And if you look at the scheme, where have the experts even been consulted? There are few generals and the Army Chiefs who are supporting it, but there are numerous generals who are also opposing it, who are questioning the very fabric of the Indian Army, which will be weakened after this scheme. So all that has to be looked into. The government cannot just put this eyewash of creating employment, which is only for 4 years. Today the youth which is unemployed at 21, at 22, at 23 will be unemployed at 28. That is what the BJP is doing here, Gaurav. They are only delaying it. They are only further pushing it.
Rakesh Sinha, respond. There is no consultation that has been held, and we won't go into the track record as Swati did. But let's stay on the current issue. The government has a history of not engaging with stakeholders, bringing about a scheme, and then we see this fire.
The tragedy of contemporary Indian discourse is deliberate lack of knowledge or ignorance. You know, when Swati was speaking that for the first time in the history Army Chief came to defend the government, I'm really surprised. You know, because you cover army for a long time, you come from an army family. After the defeat of 1962, when hundreds of the soldiers martyred due to the fault of the Nehru government, Indian Army Chief was asked to defend government not once, 10 times in the press conference. In 1972, when Indira Gandhi entered into Simla Pact against the wishes of the Indian Army, Army was forced to defend Indira Gandhi's grossly mistaken action. So kindly Congresspersons should know the history of Indian Army. Indian Army is above the political consideration.
But sir, both of them were disasters. Is this then the third disaster, sir? Is this then the third? We agree 62 was a disaster. 72 Shimla agreement was a disaster.
Because you know.
But is this then a disaster again?
No, I'm just coming because she has accused our government, so I have to unravel the facts. S.K. Sinha was not appointed because Army Chief, because he was suspected close to Jayaprakash Narayan. There are a lot of examples, but I'm not going to that. Here the question is that there is an internal system in the army. There is a discussion takes place. Indian Army is modeled on the pattern of World War II's army. The entire organization is model all over the world, World War II's pattern. Post-World War, the NATO countries and most of the European countries have initiated great reforms in 1980s and 1990s. Most of the countries have reformed army. Indian Army remained outside the purview of the radical reform. For the first time, an initiative has been taken. That initiative has 3 advantages. One, the average age which is required.
Okay.
Second, that is, army is not only for the conflict, the border conflict. Army has a wider role. We have seen in the post-independent India, army's wider role. So 4 years training is going to be very advantageous for the national interest.
Okay.
Third, Agniveers have the ample and umpteen opportunities, both in the public and private sectors. These are the things which are going to give advantage to the youth, nation and the nation building process.
Fair
Army
enough.
is going to be more powerful.
Sir, the
more
Congress also alleges
energetic,
that this
more
is
active,
the
but the
RSS
Congress
agenda that is being put forward. I'll come to that aspect in just a moment. But General Kulkarni, in your appreciation as a veteran, is this a well thought out scheme, deliberated, internally transformational as the army chief puts it, or is there merit in the Congress and opposition parties and protesters saying that this is hackneyed, came in a hurry, there are so many gaps in the scheme that it will lead to a disaster? It's a recipe for disaster.
Gaurav, thank you very much for inviting me. At the very outset, let me say that indeed the entire scheme is transformative, a reform which was long overdue, and it had to come because after the Kargil Committee report, the officers' age had definitely reduced, the commanding officer's age had definitely reduced, but the men's age had not been reduced. And therefore, this scheme brings the age to about 26 on an average from the 32 that exist today. Having said that, this scheme has two main pillars. One, that there will be no dilution of recruitment, that the numbers have been granted, that is a 40 to 46,000 every year, and those ones would undergo training of 6 months, and then they would be there for 4 years before their discharge. And after discharge, the 25% retained, 75% would be discharged from the service. The entire thing, as I see, is the employment of the 75%, which is bothering the people around. Nothing else. If the government has made a lot of announcements, however, so far the announcements have been executive. If they become statutory, therefore it makes it mandatory for the government and not what.
That's a very important point you make there, General, that it's executive, it needs to be statutory, that those who are not taken into the army after 4 years, that's 75%, will government departments be mandated as per law to take a certain number of those people? Why is this not a law in this country? And we'll discuss that. But before that, I want to talk about these violent protests, because in a democracy, violence is unacceptable. The big question is, was this violence orchestrated? Was a plot actually hatched on WhatsApp groups? Were coaching centers involved in this? And were they actually a front for political leaders and parties? And why did this happen in some states and not in others? We bring you this report.
Railway stations torched. Trains set ablaze. Public and private property vandalized. Stones and bricks pelted, tear gas fired. The fiery Agnipath protests have stunned the country. But indications suggest many of these violent incidents of arson may have been well calculated. The plot carefully hatched in coaching centers and WhatsApp groups, used to brainwash youth and organize attacks. 3 coaching centers are under the scanner in Bihar's Masaudi, where the agitations turned extremely violent. Yathar, DDS and Arakshan coaching centers are now under the scanner of the probe.
You can see at the door, there is a lock. We tried calling the management of the center, but the phone was switched off. The police is investigating whether the management and the students had any role in the entire violence that erupted in the story.
As per cops, students from these centers were made to target the government public properties by the perpetrators. But owners of these centers are refuting the allegations.
हम लोग कभी ऐसा कल्पना भी नहीं कर सकते हैं कि बच्चों को भविष्य के साथ खिलवाड़ करें। दूसरी बात कि हम लोग को ये पता ही नहीं था कि आज जो क्या बोलता है कि दंगा वगैरह की सिस्टम था, वो हमें खुद ही मालूम नहीं था।
बच्चा जो है एक मेरा परिवार है, हम कभी नहीं चाहेंगे कि मेरा परिवार को किसी तरह का कुछ हो या इस तरह का बात हम कभी नहीं बोल सके, काहे कि उसी पर हम डिपेंड हैं। जिस पर हम डिपेंड हैं उसी का हम भड़काव करेंगे तो ऐसा कभी पॉसिबल नहीं।
It is not just in Bihar. Coaching center conspiracy seems to be linked to many other states. An FIR was lodged after links of several coaching centers to the unrest came to the fore in Madhya Pradesh's Gwalior. Authorities announced a reward for an absconding coaching center operator, while 9 coaching center operators were arrested in Uttar Pradesh's Aligarh.
अब तक कुल मिलाकर के 80 के लगभग लोगों को हिरासत में लिया गया और उनसे जो जेल भेजे गए हैं उसके अलावा जो शेष हैं उनसे भी पूछताछ की जा रही है। उनके विरुद्ध जो साक्ष्य उपलब्ध हैं उनको अभी देखा जा रहा है।
Sai Academy in Telangana, Sikandrabad has been accused of inciting students to perpetrate violence. Along with the coaching centers, several WhatsApp groups are also under the scanner. Bihar police has arrested 5 accused from Raxaul who formed a WhatsApp group and asked protesters to reach the nearby station. Several arrests were made in Uttar Pradesh's Kanpur, Bagpat, where young men were called to vandalize the station by using a WhatsApp group.
आप लोग मोबाइल पे बस फूंक दो, पुलिस वाले को गोली मार दो, जो मिले रास्ते पे, कल सुबह ये करना है, सुबह में ये करना है और हम सुनते रहेंगे, हम आपको करने देंगे। ये नहीं होगा। हम यहाँ रहे ना रहे, वर्दी रहे ना रहे, हम जिसकी कसम खाएं हम वो काम करेंगे।
After the initial slumber, Bihar administration has suddenly sprung into action. WhatsApp chats and other social media platforms are being investigated. In question is the role of coaching institutes and also netas affiliated to opposition parties. It is expected that in the next few days, big arrests could be made. With video journalist Sanjay, this is Mosmi Singh in Patna for India Today.
Swati, Malik, investigations seem to indicate that, at least that is what the police claims, that all these protests were actually orchestrated. Is this what is happening in the name of protest, ma'am?
Not at all. Actually, if you recall this morning when the Congress party leadership, when we called for the protest, we only called for a peaceful protest. We condemned any sort of violence and we still condemn any sort of violence or damage to public property by any protesters. We've only called for peaceful protest. But Gaurav, please understand where this youth is coming from also. The anger in this youth is from the fact that since 2019 there's been no recruitment. And after this, now in mid-2022, they come up with this scheme, which is only for 4 years. So what about the youth which has been training and working hard towards and who's been taking exams, giving eight times some exams have happened and cancelled and repeated, etc., right? What about that youth? Where do they go now?
Respond, Rakesh Sinha. This is youth anger, claims the Congress, and they insist they want protests to be peaceful.
You know, we are part of the Indian democracy. We have seen so many movements. JP movement 1974 and Mandal Commission agitation, which was very provoking, and there was a great polarization in Indian society for the first time on the caste line. But when Mandal Commission was announced, there was no violence. There was a protest and demonstrations. That was a time when people suspected violence. Later on, certain violence took place, but very microscopic violence took place. This time, just before, after the announcement, the abrupt violence erupted. It showed that some people were prepared for violence. Whatever decision might have been, whether government would have announced something else, there would have been violence. Rashtriya Jangal Raj Dal, that is RJD. It reminded the people, though new generation forgotten what happened during the Lalu Raj. Now they reminded that if they would come into the power, the Bihar would be a jungle Raj. And the Congress party, I'm really surprised. When Rahul Gandhi is before ED and answering the ED's question, you know, the Congress party is looking for fishing in the troubled water because it wants to divert the attention of the entire people.
Sir, but you are saying the opposition was prepared, everyone was prepared, it seems everyone was prepared, but the government wasn't prepared, and national property is being set on fire, and that clearly is unacceptable. If there are people, if there are political parties and leaders involved, sir, you have the police. Take action that's based on evidence, and let's hope whether that actually happens. General, I'm sorry I've run out of time on this part of the show, but we will be tracking the story very closely in the days and weeks ahead.